I think we're on. Yes, we are live. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel. My name is Fleur Marty. I'm an executive producer at Gearbox. And I will have the pleasure today of facilitating this panel called War Stories from the Frontline of Game Development. And you're going to get to hear from those three absolutely amazing ladies, which I will try and introduce. So first, in no particular order, except she's sitting in the middle, Heather. Heather Chandler has been working as a production leader for almost 30 years. The list of studios she has worked or consulted for across her impressive career will be too long to go through right now, but Heather has led development on major franchises, including Fortnite, Helldivers 2, and Ghost Recon. She is also the author of many books focused on game production, project management, and localization. And I will now ask her, as I will ask each of our panelists, Heather, what is one thing you would like to share with the audience? One thing that I have not mentioned yet.
One of the favorite things about making games for me is actually working with the people. So I really take great pleasure in working with teams to help them realize their vision. And that is the satisfaction I get when we launch things, just seeing the looks on everyone's faces like, I made that. And it's just incredibly rewarding, and that's why I've done it for so long.
Thank you, Heather. Next, sitting at the complete left for you is Maria. Maria Cornelius is the Chief Product Officer and former CEO of Arrowhead Game Studios, where she played a pivotal role in leading the Helldivers 2 team to a successful global launch. She also worked at Spotify and Paradox Interactive, and whether there or in her current role at Arrowhead, she specializes in turning creative ambition into sharp, actionable bets. She's also very passionate about her work as a board member for Fast Travel Games, a VR games developer and publisher. Maria, same question to you. What is one thing that I didn't mention that you would like the audience to know about you?
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. One thing about me, I'm very, very passionate about the future leaders in this country. And I'm hoping and betting that there's maybe some here that are about to make some very cool decisions about the future of our industry and where it's heading. So if you're ever wanting to catch up and talk more, talk about your development, don't be shy to talk to me afterwards or to write me on LinkedIn or anything like that. And I hope something in our talk here is going to be valuable for you. These ladies are amazing, so I'm confident you'll find something.
Thank you, Maria. And last but not least, Stefania Aldorsdottir is the CEO of the Avalanche Studio Group, developer and publisher of beloved titles like Just Cause and Rage 2, but of course also, and especially relevant to this panel, Hunter: Call of the Wild, which has been live since 2016. Among many other things, Stefania also spent 8 years at CCP, developers of EVE Online, where she held various production roles and eventually became the general manager of the studio. Stefania, same question to you.
Yeah, it ties into the various things that you mentioned. My whole career has not been in games. I've swapped. I started off in science. And you will see when we start talking that I have a thing for testing my assumptions, and that comes from my background being in science for years. And in the meantime, I stepped out of the gaming industry to lead business for big sustainable energy company. But also, I raised a VC fund where we did not invest in games. So I have stepped out, and the gaming industry the Avalanche pulled me back in, and it's kind of an easy job to pull me back in because I have a passion for games, and ever since I was a small kid in the 80s and got my Sinclair Spectrum and learned to program on it, I sometimes think back, and if the small girl there would have known you can actually like have this as a job, amazing. So I'm always very happy to speak to a crowd like this, where we can have honest conversations about where we are heading, and as Maria said, future leaders amongst the group. So thank you.
Thank you, Stefania. All right, so we're gonna dive into questions. We're gonna try and make sure that we leave some time for room Q&A at the end. I'm gonna try and keep an eye on the time. I know they have a lot to say, so we're gonna dive into it. And my first question is, all three of you have worked on games that ended up being massively successful and left a mark on the industry one way or another. I would like to know, and maybe starting with you, Heather, what do people often get wrong about what it actually takes to break through like this?
I think in the example of Fortnite, when I first started at Epic, they were working on Fortnite, and at the time it was called Save the World. So if any of y'all are familiar with that mode, you know it's a 4-player co-op mode where you play against the environment. That part had been in development for 6 years. And a lot of times when I tell people I work on Fortnite, or at the time when I worked on it, they would say, oh, the Battle Royale thing, it's so cool, and nobody ever talks about Save the World. So I'm here to kind of give it a little bit of attention, because one of the things that the development on Save the World allowed was for the tools and the pipelines and the assets for us to be able to put the Battle Royale mode together very, very quickly. And like Stefania mentioned earlier about testing assumptions, that was kind of an assumption that we'd made. Oh, we think people might like this type of game mode if we added building to it. And so we got it out very quickly. But the reason we were able to do it so quickly, it wasn't just that it happened overnight. The team had been laboring on it for at least 6 years and had already proven out a lot of the different systems, including the building system. We already were trying to operate at scale because we had launched Save the World a couple months before. So there was a lot of sort of foundational work that was done, and it makes it seem like Battle Royale just kind of came out of, or our version of it came out of left field, and it really had not. And it was a lot of to do internally as well. Just people were like, well, what were the discussions like? Honestly, it was like, hey, we think this would be fun for the player. Let's get it out there and see if they like it. And then if they do, we will then, see what more they want. And then that's what started sort of the iterative development of it.
Yeah, you want, so, and I just want to hone in on this point of be mindful of what you're getting wrong as well. Testing assumptions. And there are so many things and I can share, for example, EVE Online is very PvP competitive. And for me, it's live games are what EVE is when I was growing up in EVE. Now live games are completely can be something completely different. Helldivers, Maria and Heather have proven you can actually have a PvP that is not necessarily competing against each other, but you're competing against the environment as well, or more than that. So getting it wrong, first game is not necessarily a success, first iteration is not necessarily a success, and always there are those secret foundations, like Heather said, that people just don't see. So being ready to just go under the surface and understand what made it, what made those things available to us.
Yeah, and leaning into that, I think it's very easy that people look at, for an example, Helldivers 2, and people will either think that it was, every single decision along the way has been a kind of, mastermind kind of level of planning and execution, and the other camp is just that it was complete luck, and neither of those two are true. And leaning into what both of you talked about, I think understanding your competitive advantage as a team, and that means for Helldivers 2, Arrowhead had been making games for a long time before Helldivers 2 happened, a very long time. And those, over a decade working on especially multiplayer experiences and understanding
what is truly sticky in a multiplayer experience, both in terms of gameplay and fantasy. That is a competitive advantage that we ask ourselves how we can lean into, right? And you either then need to release lots of games that are not, it's not going to go boom straight away, or you need to, like EVE Online did, build something that is robust enough that you and your team needs to be robust enough that you keep iterating on it until it's a success, right? So there's a lot of considerations to take there, and looking at your team and saying what's going to work for us, because it's not going to be the same across this panel or across your guys' games either.
Actually, you're giving me a really good segue into the next question, because some of that is taking bets, right? And so I would be curious to know, did you take any risky bets? What were they and how did they play out?
Yeah, so one of those bets for us was, I don't know if you guys were, how many was at the Stephen Flowers talk about the Galactic War this morning? I think, yeah, so a lot of people, great. One of the aspects that was really, really hard for us to test out, and it ties to this aspect that we're talking about, the studio was amazing at co-op, but we had this idea of what I call massive co-op, and this idea of the meta level that was greater than just the 4-person co-op, and a kind of community level co-op. And to try to enable that, we leaned into the game master function, because of the way that our game is built is very much, we try to design the game more like game masters in a tabletop role-playing game than we do as, you know, screenwriters, for an example. So leaning into that, but that feature is incredibly difficult to test in pre-production, right? The amount of genuine players you need to try to actually test this out and see how the Galactic War is going to behave together with this Game Master feature was incredibly difficult, and figuring out how to lead in those moments in a way where you take a bet and you could be taking the wrong one because you just do not have all of the data to prove out something. It's a difficult thing to do, but as with Steven's talk earlier, obviously it's a part of the game now that makes the game so alive. And it's also the part where, yeah, we don't have player versus player, but we do have player versus game master. And that is an incredibly fun part of the game for us, and how we work with the kind of the longevity of our product. So
I've actually kind of an example, like when you have a live game like EVE Online, we put out expansions like twice a year or something, and then I'm operating now a live game called Hunter Call of the Wild simulation game, and we put out DLCs. It is vastly different, but I'm just gonna tell you, I've been part of taking a bet, putting out a cosmetic thing that the players absolutely hated. So it doesn't always pay off to take the bet, but if you don't take any bets, you're not doing anything. So it's always about the taking the bet. But in my books, it's more like, how do I deal with that? If I do something, if I take a bet that, like, and I put out the cosmetic things that the players want to kill me for, how do I deal with that? You have to be ready for that. And that is the resilience that we need to have. And sometimes we need to eat up, like, things we put out and say, okay, what's wrong? And then deal with it. So I think sounds really nice to take bets. It just feels awful sometimes.
I think on Fortnite, Epic as a culture, I like to describe it as very much a startup entrepreneurial place. So they always take bets on a lot of different things. And I think they made 2 big bets on Fortnite. First of all, it was a game that was really not like any other game they'd made before. They'd done Gears of War and had done very well with that. And they really wanted to find something different to do. That is why Fortnite is so bright and colorful and more cartoony. And so they took a bet that players would like it if they made this style of game. And then I think they also decided to self-publish, because prior to that, they had always worked with publishers. And this was something that Tim Sweeney was interested in doing because he really believes in his games and his teams. And so we made a bet about the self-publishing thing, and we had to kind of build the publishing department, as we were also getting the game kind of launched and scaling it and all of that. And I guess a third bet, I mean, like I said, there's so many bets that they make all the time, and some of them don't work out as well, but most of the time they do, because we view it as a way to fail and pivot. But certainly the free-to-play option, because originally Save the World, and I think it is still a paid mode, we were trying a more traditional model where you pay for a pack and you get this, that, and the other. And when we had the Battle Royale mode, we decided to release it free to play just to kind of see what would happen. And so that was a bet that obviously paid off big time.
Thank you. Kind of tangential of like making decision, taking bets, iterating when you're getting the feedback. Some of the games you've worked on have been like instant successes, and some others have taken like some time to actually find their audience and find their success. So how do you navigate either, and do you have like learnings about either of that you want to share with the audience? Do you want to start?
Yeah, it's always, when you look back, you know it all. That's the piece. But I've worked on games that were not an overnight success, like Game Online and Hunter Call of the Wild. They got picked up by players, yes, and they were games. They are still games that like built on the community, and very much the development teams are continuing to develop those games. But I don't know if the numbers that we had back then at the launch, like some 8 or some 20-something years ago, in those cases, what people would say about those numbers today, if it would actually be good enough for how games are being viewed today. And I was very lucky to be work on game to begin with that had this resilience, like whether you had to have, like we continued and we knew we had something, and it was built out from that something, and it was built out from that, like picking up what the players picked up on. There were plenty of things in Eve that you have, like that you won't see today because it was just abandoned and things that people were picking up from. So I think this is really a tough balance between the long-term success or seeing your game be success at launch. And I will not say either or there is one universal truth in there. But I want to say there is how your numbers look today, if you put out a live game, might not necessarily predict what it can become, if that makes sense. And this is where I'm like, we're at a different place, and people view things as business in a really different way from what it used to be. And I'm not saying it was better back then. It's just, it has changed. Competitive landscape is different as well.
Maria, any?
Yeah, I would say from the more internal perspective, like Fortnite, I'm looking at my phone because I wrote some notes down here. In August of 2017, we had 1 million players, 1 million concurrent players, and by September 2017, we had 10 million. So we had to scale up a lot of our systems and services. We had sort of the online platform team was just kind of heads down, figuring out how to solve all these problems. We were like, wow, we need to feed the content machine. So anybody who's worked on live games, and Stephen talked this morning about how players blast through your content a lot faster. So we're like, okay, we're gonna do weekly content updates. And so we had to set up pipelines for that. We had to look internally and kind of restructure our teams. We had other projects internally in development, and we had to, scavenge from them because we simply just needed more people to make more content. We needed the engineers focused on all of the scaling. And so through all of that, as we kind of had this trial by fire, we were then able to get some breathing room eventually to, make more established processes, figure out how to set the teams up so that they were making content at a slower pace than they were and things like that. So there was a lot of sort of stuff that had to go on internally across all levels of the company.
Yeah, I think it's the first question you have to ask yourself with even what's the goal here, because I think that's the underlying question. It's, you know, what are we even aiming for to begin with? And it comes down to, again, kind of understanding your team and your competitive advantage and also weaknesses and how to mitigate for those. Should you be aiming for a live service success or not? And if you're aiming for live service, then a out of the gate smash success is not actually necessary, but it does mean that you then have to have the structure, the patient investors, all of those things around you to enable that. If you do not have that, then probably live service isn't the way to go. And if you are aiming for live service, like we did, then you are lucky if you have a success. But live service games do not live off of that success. You put that behind you and you move on. Live service games have to live on the cash flow, the operating cost. What does it cost to keep making, and how much are you able to bring back in to support this ecosystem that you're building, that is both building, you know, the dreams of your devs as well as the players that you're trying to entertain, right? So figuring out what is even desirable, I think, is so important. And I think one of my favorites, when we really sat down and tried to figure out what is it that we're trying to do here, we're trying to hit a trajectory that is positive rather than trying to hit super ambitious goals every single time. What is the trajectory that we want to be on? And for us, we talked a lot. I love talking about, for an example, Hearts of Irons. If you look at that curve, that's a DLC kind of game, but that's an impressive, continuous upwards curve. So let's not sleep on DLCs when we talk about live service. There's so many places and things to kind of try to think outside of the box and take inspiration from, and not assuming that one thing is better than another. But of course it is great if you have some success up front. It also means you have to push a lot of more content probably towards your release rather than having it ready for your post-launch kind of follow-up. So there's a lot of optimizations there that needs to be taken into consideration.
I want to go back to something that Stefania said about how she doesn't know if Eve was released today with like those numbers, would it look like success? Now that we've been making live games for a while, what do you feel has changed in how we make them and what even they are, if we compare from like 15 years ago to now, and how do you think this is going to how do you see it keeping evolving? Who wants to go?
I can start. So one of the things that we've learned from EVE Online is that the best retention is to play with your friends. It is fantastic to play with your friends. The social aspect of it is fantastic, has always been. And the game caters for that. And a lot of games have started to cater for that, of course, for the social aspect to be there. And then now with Hunter Call of the Wild, which is a hunting simulation game, we have a very strong community that is very dedicated, and this game is their hobby. It is more than a game to them. And I think that this respect for the player is like, how is your player, what is it that they're getting out of this? Are they gaining friends at the same time as they are engaging with their hobby? So this, like building the community, and this is where I'm focusing very much on. And we have a new game development within Avalanche where we try to validate very early every aspect of the games that we are developing. And when we launch the games, we will launch the games because we know there is a community that is going to be supporting that. And we start to this validation, and we have built up a community called Avalanche Frontrunners, and this is very much to be ready for the future, because if I would predict the future, I would, if I only knew. So we see this as the best way to predict the future, is to go early on and understand our players, the players who play this type of game. And when I talk to, I used to be in VC and startups, and so I used to help a lot of gaming startups. And when I talk to people who are starting with making their own game, they all set out to test early and validate early. And then everyone becomes too busy to do it because it comes with it takes a lot of effort, and you're never ready. And it's like, no, I need to finish this. Can't put it out because people are not going to understand what I'm doing, and so on. You have to. You just have to. Otherwise, you can't take the learnings. And sometimes you put something out, and you get feedback that is not valuable to you. Fine, then do it again. This also is a learning process, an iterative process, and this is what I think is going to be way more crucial than ever before in creating, especially games where you build community.
Maria, I see you nodding a lot.
Yeah, I love that. I think that it's something that's so difficult for us when we, especially because the games we make have such a creative aspect to it. It's so difficult to take something so private and then put it out there and have people feedback on it, especially when it's not finished or done. I do think that this, going back to the question about the kind of the future of live service, as I kind of said before, I hope more than anything that the future of live service is very very diverse and has a lot of different angles and aspects, and that we don't all take the same kind of model and copy paste it onto every game. And I think to get there, we really have to pay even closer attention to the communities that we're trying to reach. And they do need to become a bigger part of the conversation, which is where this type of iterative testing, or iterative dialogue, let's call it, it becomes so important. And being able to have that conversation about, daring to build your game together with your community in some kind of way. And that can mean, if you're an indie studio, that might mean that you're picking some friends that you have that like the kind of game that you're making, set them down and test and see what their feedback is. But for a studio that is not doing early access, it's how do you work with UX tests? How do you incorporate that into your development? Or if you're actually doing early access, of course, kind of being able to get feedback that way. I think it's massively important, and understanding that your game is there to, give heart and entertainment and fun to someone who's gonna love it, and not, it's so important to make sure that it's really player focused, whatever it is that we're doing, and that we're not making business decisions that don't actually connect to the communities that we're trying to work together with.
Yeah, I think community is kind of a big thing that has been part of the games that came out even from Eve, and I think that's something that has changed and grown how the community can get involved. And I think Maria gave a great example with the Galactic War with Helldivers. I think, Fortnite has done all different types of things within the game to increase community, such as having live concerts. So the Travis Scott concert was attended by millions of people all over the world. They had a common experience. It was something for them to get excited and talk about. So I think when I look at the future of live games, I see, Fortnite is evolving into a platform. You have the Roblox platform, which is also a live game, but it has all these different experiences you can have as a community creator. And so for me, that's what I think has been able to change the most, because we now have the technology in place to support people coming into a world, having a common experience, but also personalizing it and making it an individual experience that they can chat about with their friends and even with their online friends, their real world friends. And I think that, for me, is the most exciting aspect of live games and where I see it going.
Yeah, and I think to this point, I think when you want to have your player base very committed to your game, you have to show commitment in the same time, because if someone is investing their time in the game, they need to know you're still developing the game. So it is always the balance of you putting out new content, you're also doing improvements, and your game needs to look fresh and new. And there's also balance between gaining the player acquisition versus the retention. This commitment, the players need to know that you are on top of things, that otherwise, why should they invest their time in it? And I think this has become very, very obvious for a lot of games. If you don't evolve, stagnating is then the next step, which is tough.
You, all three of you, keep mentioning your players, engaging with your players, community. So I'm curious to know, have you been surprised by your communities? Have you been challenged by them? Probably I know the answer to that, but is there something in the communities of the games you've worked on where they really they caught you by surprise? You didn't expect that?
I mean, I would say Fortnite had all types of surprises. I mean, and I think we have had outages. We have people picking apart patch notes. We have people, you know, just really driving sort of what the content is that we make. For example, an early example, we had rocket launchers. We released those, and speaking of going fast, I mean, that was one of sort of our tenets internally, is like, let's get to the players as soon as possible. And maybe we didn't have enough testing time on it. Maybe we did, I won't say. But there was a rocket launcher, and the players figured out that you could hop on top of the rocket launcher and right across the map. And we had conversations where like, oh, wow, this doesn't seem like a good idea, but the players really loved it, and so it became a feature, not a bug. And so it was the players' engagement with that and the desire to have that feature that made it, you know, something that we kept. And I think the players have also taught us a lot about how do we deal with crisis. So when the game came out and we grew to like, you know, 10 million players, we had an outage. One of our earliest outages lasted over 24 hours, and the players just were like losing their minds. And so what we ended up doing is we said, okay, the best way we can deal with this and kind of help the players is, of course, we gave them free stuff. So we've always been very generous. But also, how do we communicate out about it? And we thought, oh, well, we could do, you know, just sort of like a PR sort of thing and try to smooth things over. But we said, no, let's let them know exactly what happened. So our lead engineer spent a couple hours writing this full-on blog post about what exactly had happened, you know, for the people that wanted that technical information. We made a promise to the players that we were, of course, looking into it, making roadmaps so the players could see where we're going. And so it's because the players wanted these things, that is how we get surprised, and we're like, okay, how do we help them? How do we help the players understand and get back on our side?
Just on this, you mentioned it's such a good story. This balance between being so open to the community, but then keeping something as a surprise. And players will always pick everything apart that you put out, and that's of course that has been the whole time in EVE Online. And I'm following now a lot the player community on Hunter Call of the Wild, which is a fascinating community, and it's so different from the EVE community, for example. And I've been surprised of how openly people want to share their struggles on hunting, and their like, and also on their like, some of them do hunting in real life, and I've been surprised of the openness in those communities about talking about the hunting experience and how it translates to the game. And this has been an enlightening thing for me, to be part of a simulation community that is connecting in real life. So it's just sharing good experiences.
Yeah, I love that. Then that's the magic. Like, that's the magic that we're all trying to get to. Like, and when you have that, because at the end of the day, studios and the teams and the fans, the players of our games, there's like this symbiosis. We don't exist without the Helldivers fans to support and play and love the games that we're making. And that community wouldn't exist without our game. And there is this natural symbiosis or ecosystem that I really, really believe in. And I think like when you manage to do that, there's such magic that is created when you find that line. And that's for our game. I really think of it just as this the biggest tabletop role-playing game in the world, I'd like to think. With the one game master, that's what we like to make it feel like, at least. But as Steven told us all earlier, it's not quite as simple as that. But just having this feeling of one game master, thousands of players gathering around this massive table and having like a back and forth, and this feeling of like, oh shit, we did this. Malevolent Creek happened because we leaned the hell into this thing that just happened. And for the for us then as the developers to respond to that, to give them capes for their valid, their fighting and the glory. I think that's some of the most beautiful moments so community can be very scary. We just talked about how scary it is to give them unfinished things and have them give us feedback. God knows we've had some strong opinions from our communities about many of the things that we or Sony have done, but the amount of love that we also get and the fact that we get to continue working the way that we are, it's so important.
I wanted to add a coda to my answer because I also wanted to talk about how much I enjoy the player-created content that comes out, or the different choices that they make, or the memes, or this or that. And if some of y'all are familiar with the Orange Justice dance in Fortnite, that was a community-selected dance because we kind of put out a contest like, hey, we want to put a new dance in. And there was some kid, he was like in 7th or 8th grade. He had this special dance called the Orange Justice, and it, just became this thing where everyone rallied around it. And they're like, okay, we want this in the game. And so that is what won. And I think on Helldivers, of course, the Save the Children thing, where there was a mission where they could either save the children, it was a part of the in-world narrative, or they could do this other thing and then unlock something in the game, and they actually chose to save the children. And so because of that, Arrowhead donated money it was just amazing when you see the chain reaction when you are working together with your community, because they do surprise and delight you as much as you want to surprise and delight them.
So that's a very positive aspect. That's good surprises, but I think for all of you, all of the games that you've worked on, there have been those highs, and then there have been some lows, some public negative reaction to something, to a feature, so as leaders, how do you first yourself stay grounded, and then how do you help your team? Like, how do you protect them? How do you help them navigate through that? Whether the negative or the positive, because it's also easy to have the success inflate your head, right?
I think one thing that I would say, I'll start answering the question from the leader angle, like being a leader in that situation. Again, I bet there's a ton of leaders already here or future leaders here. I think just one thing that I just wish that I had understood earlier was that, because I thought of management a lot of a time management game, let's call it. And I was like, if I'm really effective with how I spend my time and what I spend it on, we're going to do great things. And sometimes it's actually an energy management game more than it is a time management game. And if I manage my energy, as carefully as I did my calendar, sometimes I think I would have been able to more sustainably get through some of the situations that I've been in. And I think that's just something super important to think about. What is it that gives me energy? Because when you're in really, really, really tough situations and your whole team is looking to you to have answers to the things that you don't have answers to, nobody does. But you have to inspire, you have to lead the way nonetheless, figuring out where to, what do I say no to? How do I go into power saving mode right now so that I can get through this? It's going to be very, very important. And on that, I do also think, just thinking about the same thing for your team, because during those moments in time, they're gonna be going online and they're going to be hearing all of this negativity surrounding the thing that they are making and that they love so much and that they're pouring so much heart and soul in, and that is draining. That is really, really draining. So thinking about what is the experience right now of being a developer on my team, and they do not have all the context that I do in kind of what this means and where we are, and really trying to be very empathetic, honestly, in those moments. And obviously also just making sure your team is just actually safe. All of those things, very, very important, especially if you do have very big releases where it becomes very public. Look out for your community managers.
Do you want to continue, Heather?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, like, when you're working on games of this scale, too, every little thing gets noticed and called out by the players. And as Maria said, the developers go read Reddit. They're part of the community Discord. They see all this information. And most of the time, if they're, they will come back and have some good ideas about how to address it. But sometimes it becomes too much because the developers feel called out, and people will do that. And I think you just have to make sure that the developers know that your goal is the same as theirs. We all want to make a great game. We want to help the players. And so what I like to try to do is like say, okay, we got this feedback. Let's not worry about the stuff that is not important, like the negativity and the way that it was delivered. But is this feedback that you want to address? And if so, let's get focused on the tangible stuff. What can we actually do? How can we address this? What's this going to look like? How do we want to test it internally to see if it's going to address? And I think keeping them grounded and focused on something to address that is a good way to do it. And then the community management team takes a lot of flack, as Maria says. And so then making sure that they are properly staffed, that they have the appropriate talking points, making sure that if your developers are going to go online, that you have provided them training on if they even should interact with players. I mean, in some places I've worked at, we don't want the developers interacting. Other places you do, so you have to have all of those guidelines in place so that you can help manage the community, especially when bad things happen.
Yeah, to that, so for me, it's important that I show up as a leader with resilience, and I can do that because I've been through a lot of difficult things, and you only grow your resilience by going through the difficult things and coming out on the other side. And I have to, and I work with like people on different layers as a CEO, and some of them haven't gone through this, and they haven't trained on the resilience part. And I just want to talk about it in general, how important it is in those times that we are going through right now, that we actually like work on our resilience on a personal level and also on the leadership level. And that's how I show up, is that in times of crisis, I want to stay with clear head. I want clarity. And that's what I try to bring to the situation, is clarity. My heart might be pounding and I might lose sleep every night. I will still show up. And I will still show up to try to get clarity. And then I want to just say, have you seen the new Superman movie? With Superman, I related so to this. So my teenagers, they dragged me to the Superman movie, of course. They said, you have to see it with us. So, and Superman says, it's like about superheroes, is that they wake every day and put one foot in front of the other. So I thought, if Superman can do that, I can do it. So it is always good to take a little bit a step on the, like, okay, what is the big picture? Where are we going? Okay, we're going here. So if anything, train resilience as times are right now, and check it, watch the new Superman movie, it's awesome.
One thing I thought of when you were saying that also is just, if you are a leader, if you're aspiring to be a leader, think about what kind of leader you want to be before you're in a really, really, really difficult situation and have to make very difficult choices. Think about how you want to show up in those moments. It's perfectly okay to not be at your best at every one of those times in those low moments, but it is very hard to see the situation clearly and to understand what kind of leader you want to be when you're in it. So if you've already thought about those things, then you can anchor your decisions, how you're communicating things to your team. Does this reflect the type of leader that I want to be? Read through what you're just about to send on Slack to all of your colleagues and make sure that that actually aligns. And then lastly, I just want to shout out to all of these teams, because teams going through this type of public, opinion and going through so much attention from the community is not easy at all. And I know for Helldivers too, I'm so proud of that team. This was not at all what they were, the outcome that they were maybe expecting. And it is so amazing to see that type of resilience in that team, and I'm so proud of them and proud of you guys' team too.
It's super interesting. We said we were gonna leave time for Q&A. Also, Stefania, thank you so much for setting up my talk on building resilient teams, although it was an hour ago, so. I want to ask one last thing to each of you before we go to room Q&A, and maybe, Maria, that what you just said is what you wanted to say, but what's the one thing you wish you'd learned earlier in your career as a leader, and you want to share with the room?
I don't know, so many things. There's so many things. But not everything is worth your time. That's what I would have liked to. I knew it, but exercising it is so hard. Not everything or everyone is worth your time.
Yeah, I think to piggyback on that, not everything's important, you know, and so when I have lots of different things going on, I just say, okay, what is the absolute most important thing? And then focus on that, get your teams focused on that. There's a lot of stuff that is, you don't need to worry about. It'll take care of itself. And I'm often saying that. People come to me in a panic. They're like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. Don't worry about it. You know, and I don't know. And it's funny because I get good feedback by saying, oh, when Heather says that, I believe it. And so it's because we, as earlier I discussed, we focus on the plan and the solution. They come and they say, okay, blah, this bad thing's happened. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, because we're going to fix it. Here's what we're going to do. And I think as a leader, just understanding what is important, and that's something that if I had known that earlier, earlier in my career, I would have spent less sleepless nights, worrying about things that I didn't need to be worrying about.
Also, important and urgent is not the same thing.
Yeah, and just one thing that I would add on to that, when something is important, one thing that I wish I'd honed earlier is when you know whether it's a recruitment that feels a little bit off or something in the game that feels a little bit off, when your real instincts are telling you that it is actually important, act super quickly. It's only going to get more intense and more difficult to deal with down the line. So just moving faster than the problem with the solution and getting that in place, your future self will, say thank you to you for just dealing with it really quickly rather than just letting it sit.
Thank you. Trust your gut. That's